I was going to
Go
say,
ahead.
before we go there, I mean, would a natural bridge transition would be just a brief update on the World Health Organization treaty proposals.
Yeah.
And it's not much other than there's people still getting confused. So there's a proposal for internal regulations. Stephen Miller's organization, America First, wrote a protest letter to the Biden administration saying that the Biden administration should not even be proposing any kind of treaty, nor should they be even proposing internal rules within the World Health Organization that would give the World Health Organization governing power over any country or any nation anywhere in the name of pandemic authority. Now, that is what the Biden administration is pushing. Those internal rules are not enforceable in the United States until and unless it is passed by a treaty. And that requires 2/3 consent by the Senate. The Biden administration is going to be the World Health Organization. Their assembly is meeting the same time as the World Economic Forum is getting together in Davos this week. So Savannah Hernandez and some other Rebel News has sent some good people over to
Rebel sent 5 people down to cover what's going on in Davos. But Robert, I mean, it's not an accident. I mean, they're talking that people are finding these 2021 what's the word when you make
simulation.
Yeah, simulation of monkeypox.
Kind of like Bill Gates, late 2019, did a simulation about what would happen if a coronavirus came to America, and voila, a few months later, there it was. And apparently there was a simulation that was about monkeypox. Some people are calling it moneypox. Dr. Robert Malone did a good breakdown of it. Oh, I just realized I changed my name. That was from another interview. Somebody else changed it for me. At Viva, barneslaw.locals.com. You can get, I included a link to Robert Malone's article about that in terms of that. But for everybody out there, there is no imminent treaty, and there is no World Health Organization passing these rules does not become governing binding law in the United States, period. It's got to at least pass as a treaty in the Senate, and even then there's limits on that. That the degree to which, yes, a treaty is the supreme law of the land, but not to the extent it governs other constitutional rights and remedies. It can't trump those things. That has to go through a whole constitutional amendment, not just the Senate approval. So the only thing that can do is just change certain things that don't impact constitutional rights, and even then, not law until it's 2/3 of the Senate agrees to it.
But who is down there now discussing what? You got the who's down there discussing the what, but which representatives of nation states are there? Like it's not just
so a bunch of people have joined the World Health Organization, but it's kind of like the World Trade Organization. So in 2020, Trump opted out, said we're leaving the World Health Organization. We passed a law in the late 1940s to join it. But that was not a treaty. It wasn't a treaty that passed. So all it was we're entering it. We'll continue to pay our dues. If we decide to leave, we'll give you a year's notice in terms of dues. Trump gave that notice because of the election fornication that happened in November. Biden reversed that notice, and so we're still in it. And they're looking for internal rules about how they govern themselves internally. But that doesn't apply. It's not enforceable domestic law in the United States until there's a treaty passed. And even then, they can't trump the Constitution. That they have to amend the Constitution to do.
Yeah, but you're going to get a lot of people who are not going to be satisfied with this. And they're saying we're a member of the WHO. Sure, it's non-binding, but they're down there discussing international treaties, which are not in effect yet. But if
it's something for people should pay attention to. I think the risk is that people think will go out crying wolf and saying as soon as these rules change, now there's a governing treaty that supersedes the Constitution. When people discover that doesn't happen in the following, say, 6 months or a year, then when they come back and try to propose it in the treaty so that it would be governing domestic law, again, not trumping the Constitution, but governing domestic law, people will think that the criticism is invalid because they cried wolf the first time. This is why it's important to be legally correct. And there's a lot of people running ahead of the curve in terms of what's legally correct. I get why they're concerned, legitimate concern, but it's important to know what the legal consequences are so that we're accurate in what we say.
Okay, but now, so I'll say that they'll pass this treaty if they pass it at the WHO members will pass this treaty. It won't be binding on an individual member states. Okay, fine. But those states, just to pull up this chat, Libs, NDP, whatever, they'll make it law here in Canada. Now, they don't have to make the treaty law, but they'll just pass their own edicts, their own guidelines, which reflect, which mirror that which is in the treaty, and they'll cite the treaty having been passed as authority. So that's whether or not people's understanding is wrong, the treaty won't be binding. It's six of well, I guess it's six of one way, half a dozen the other.
It comes back to domestic. It still has to go through domestic legislative and executive branch approval, and at least in the United States. Different countries have different rules. Russia is talking about leaving it altogether, which is interesting. So the net effect of that Ukraine war, some of us predicted it was going to ultimately be a Russia globalist conflict, and we're seeing signs of that not only in the financial and economic system, but in the political system. And how many others leave? What happens if China leaves? What happens if Brazil leaves? What happens if India leaves? All of a sudden, the World Health Organization is just another EU organization. And until they pass, again, a U.S. treaty, they're not even enforceable in the United States. And we still have to worry about the fact they're pushing it because it means they're going to try to push it here. But people should not assume that whatever they do over in Davos or anywhere else has any binding effect on us until it comes back here.
Well, but except we've seen in COVID, they don't, half of these edicts didn't go through the legislative process in any event. So they're going to say, look, it's an emergency, it's a crisis.
Well, that's a good transition.
Yep.
That happened in Louisiana, and a pastor who continued to hold church after the governor of Louisiana said, no, you can't hold church because scary, scary pandemic. But you can do a bunch of other things. You can go to work, you can go to the airport, you can do a bunch of things, but you just couldn't go to church. Somehow that woke virus knew where to find you. And so he was being criminally prosecuted for violating several executive orders about holding church. To the credit of the Louisiana Supreme Court, they last week said you can't charge him with a crime, period. Those executive orders violated his right, First Amendment right of exercise of religion that is protected under both the federal and Louisiana constitutions. They talked about the origin of power being the people, and the government has limited power. And the government was never granted or ceded the power, even in the name of a pandemic, to discriminate against churches or prohibit their exercise thereof. And so that was a very good ruling, basically another ruling that's striking down these lockdowns such that it will be much harder for them to do this again next time in this context.
But next time, if you saw Bill Gates talking about monkeypox, I mean, the next time they know what to do. They know which countries are going to push back. They know which governments are going to push back. But even that, Robert, Louisiana, for it to have gotten to where it got to get overturned, it still made it up a few ways where it was ratified, or the orders themselves were ratified, and the charges against them were ratified. I mean, this made it past one level of court, did it not?
Sort of. And it went through the executive branch. So the governor signed it, and the local prosecutors and police prosecuted him. But the local court ultimately sent it up to the Supreme Court effectively before they ever got to any. This wasn't a post-criminal conviction case. This was a pre-criminal conviction case. So he was facing actual criminal prosecution. But this was another example where the legislative branch was never involved. And so finally the judicial branch meaningfully stepped in, and they made a ruling that's good for everybody in Louisiana and can be cited. This is another ruling in that context in which it'll be much harder to pull off lockdowns in the future because people continue, credit to the pastor, continue to fight these kind of misuse and abuse of emergency powers in the first place.
Robert, now Christy Liebel says it's proposed amendments to an already existing international health resolution 2005 will not need Senate ratification.
That is false. That is false. I've seen a lot of people say it. It's patently false. And so some of the people that are saying it need to correct. God bless them. But I'm a little bit running out of patience because they're misleading people. An international health resolution is not governing and doesn't govern the United States. Okay, we cannot change the Constitution except by amending it, folks. The World Health Organization can't change it. Nobody else can change it. Those international health rules were never even passed by Congress. The only thing Congress has ever passed is agreeing to join the World Health Organization, which was not even a treaty. And that was just about paying some dues. That's it. That has no legally binding effect. Whatever the World Health Organization does has no legally binding effect on the United States, period. The fact that they're amending, it doesn't matter what they're amending. They cannot change American law. They never could. They never will. And the risk here is that people are going to sound like they're crying wolf because they're going to, it was a lot of the complaints early on brought about against the United Nations. And there were a lot of legitimate concerns, but some conservatives overstated their case. And consequently, it undermined it when people brought criticism of things like NAFTA and China joining the World Trade or other things down the road. about joining the International Criminal Court and the risks that could pose. A lot of those criticisms weren't taken as valid as they would have been because conservatives overstated their case about the United Nations. They said the United Nations now could govern us and could send their police in. No, they can't. Just joining an organization doesn't override the Constitution of the United States. So, yes, these are amendment to internal rules of the World Health Organization, and it's their 2005 rules that they're amending, or as is proposed by the Biden administration. And it's the U.S. government pushing this. That has no binding effect on the United States, period. End of story. Anybody who says otherwise is fake news.
Okay, I'm reading the Wikipedia in the backdrop, but I'm not going to bring it up right now. Okay, so that's going to be the matter of fact on which some people might disagree. Robert, how do you prove your position that even if it's an amendment to an already passed regulation, that it will have no impact, even if passed now? Because it says if people are reading from Wikipedia, and let me just share it actually. Let's do this in real time. Wikipedia. And I believe I've got the right thing right here. The International Health Regulations, first adopted by the World Health Assembly, 1969, right. Last revised in 2005, are a legally binding instrument on the international law that aims for international collaboration to protect yada, yada, yada.
And that's false. See, like what they're noting how it's false by what they leave out. It's legally binding on the World Health Organization. It's not legally binding on the United States or its member organizations. Notice they don't say that, right? These are the legally binding rules within the WHO. That does not apply to any member state, right? So that's where there's been this deliberate attempt at misleading people. Some people are innocently being misled, but some of the institutional media is deliberately misleading people. This is why there's been letters from people, to their credit, have been asking senators and other people. This is clear in America First letter. They recognize that this is not legally binding. That they're protesting Biden even trying to do a treaty that could ever become legally binding. But it's Senator Toomey, for example, wrote back a letter to one of our members and our board members at vivabarneslaw.locals.com explaining the same thing, that this is not, and all you need to know for this, folks, is it's the Constitution. Can you amend the Constitution without going through the Constitution's process for amendment? No, you can't. Can you pass legislative branch power without it going through the legislative branch? No, you can't. So now treaties have limited domestic impact as well. Treaties can govern certain things in international relations, but their ability they can't override the constitutional protections. So even it says treaty in the Constitution says the supreme law of the land, but that is within the context that it's not amending any right within the Constitution. It can't do that unless it goes through an amendment process. That's why people are right to be concerned about this effort to centralize and concentrate power in some globalist bureaucratic organization. Absolutely right to be concerned. It's not going to be legally binding on the United States. And don't be deceived on that to such a degree that you go out saying something that's going to be disproven in 3 months or 6 months or a year. And then all of a sudden, when there really is a concern, nobody listens to you because you were wrong last time because you didn't listen to you didn't really review the law. Just anybody out there, if the Constitution says you can't amend it that way, that means you can't amend it that way. Well, there's always risk that people violate the Constitution. That's one of the counters I get. Yeah, for example, Obama joined it. Was that a binding treaty? No, it wasn't. Well, was that binding U.S. law? No, it wasn't. Well, what did Trump do? He just came in and said, nope, not interested. End of it. So how could Trump do that if that was binding law? That was never binding law. The Paris Accords were never binding law. They were a commitment of the executive branch to try to do something. Not legally binding, just a commitment, which they do all the time. Well, so that's where people are confusing certain areas about what can change and what didn't. As the SEC figured out this week, and as the entire administrative state found out this week, their assumptions can be in error, and the Fifth Circuit decision may be the beginning of a death knell to large aspects of the administrative state in America.